Patrick Nelson is a former paratrooper with a mission to inspire and shape the future. After leading soldiers in combat and receiving commendations, he transitioned from the military to the NFL. As a leadership development consultant, he equips leaders with expertise earned through a journey of 2 master's degrees. Nelson empowers businesses with a battle-tested safety leadership strategy, resulting in a remarkable 57% reduction in incident rates. Join us as he shares his non-traditional approach to making safety personal, fostering an inspired and engaged workforce. Please welcome Patrick Nelson.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Who's ready for some cake? Now, before I get started, I'm just curious if there's any big Green Bay Packers fans here. Is anybody here a big Pack? Well, thank you for volunteering, sir. Why don't you come on up here? You know what, Jamie, I'm going to need you up here as well. Come on up here, too. Now, the rest of y'all are not off the hook, though. I want you to find a partner. That's just one other person. And I want you to please stand up and talk amongst yourselves for about 45 seconds. Go ahead and do that right now, please. Okay, go ahead, remain standing, please. Stay standing. Our wonderful demonstrators up here, Jamie and Oscar, are going to show you all what you need to do. Go ahead, gentlemen.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
All right, too easy. You're going to face your partner, and y'all are going to count to 3 together, but you're going to alternate. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Back and forth. Give it a try, please. Okay. Now, I think I heard the number 4 out there, and it wasn't part of the instructions, but it's only going to get more difficult here. All right, guys, let's see it. Go ahead.
2, 3. 2, 3. 2, 3.
All right, pretty good. So you're going to replace 1 with a stomp. You're not going to say 1 anymore. It's going to be a 2, 3. 2, 3. Give it a try, please. Okay. You know what? For a bunch of smart people, some of y'all are pretty struggling with this. It's only going to get more difficult. Go ahead, guys. Show them.
3. 3.
All right. So you're going to keep the stomp, but instead of saying 2, now you're going to clap your hands 1 time. A stomp, a clap, and a 3. Go ahead. Okay, all right, last time, 1 more iteration, and we'll be done with this silliness, and I promise we'll move on to some much more important matters. Jamie, Oscar, let's see it.
Go Packers!
He's supposed to say Skull Vikings, because we're all huge Minnesota Vikings fans, right? No? Okay, you keep the stomp, you can keep the clap, you can say hook 'em horns, roll tide, boomer sooner, say anything but 3. Say yeehaw for all I care. All right, stomp, clap, and a yeehaw. Go ahead. Okay. All right, go ahead, take a seat, please. Now, I just wanted to get the blood flowing with y'all just a little bit, but I'm curious, why was something so silly like that so hard for you? Tell me. Now, I'm not here to insult your intelligence, but anytime you do something you've never done before, you may not be that good at it, right? You're only going to get better the more consistent and committed you are. And the other thing that makes that hard is you're counting on that person across from you to do their job, to do it correctly in order for you to be successful. And if they mess up, it kind of throws off that cadence and rhythm you have going on. And the good news in here is you can fail as much as you want, and there's zero consequences. But again, y'all are smart people. You go back to work, you go out those doors, that's where the real consequences exist. What I'm going to share with you has its origins from my military experience, where I had the honor and the great opportunity to serve with a diverse team of soldiers, people from all different walks of life, representing different nations and races from across our world. And I want to share one story in particular that changed my life forever. On June 8th, 2005, I was operating out of a small forward operating base near the Pakistani border. Now, this was the type of place that we were short on everything except the enemy. We faced regular indirect fire attacks, participated in several large battles that saw between 50 to 100 enemy fighters each time. Now, this particular morning, we're getting resupplied with some ammunition by a Chinook helicopter, one of those with the big double rotor blades. It was a common part of what we did. Our platoon was divided into two sections. So anytime that a resupply would come in, one of those sections would be designated as the hot gun, which meant you had to stand ready to respond in case we got attacked. The other section was responsible for unloading the supplies from the helicopter. Now, this morning, my section was the hot gun, but the other section had a sergeant that was leaving to go on R&R. So we had communicated beforehand, and I was going to go ahead and backfill his position while he was gone. So as I heard the sound of the helicopter approaching, I hopped in a Humvee with my good buddy Luke to drive out to the landing zone, that exact landing zone. And just as we were about to drive away, my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, from Yauco, Puerto Rico, hopped in the back. Now, he's supposed to be back with the hot gun, so I turned around and I was going to chew into his butt a little bit. But then I thought, you know what? I value that kind of work ethic in my soldiers. He wants to come lift some heavy boxes and help out the team. That's great. I know that our section will be fine without him. And as I was turning back around out of the corner of my eye, I noticed he didn't have his helmet on. So I literally opened my mouth. Then I realized I didn't have mine on either. It's obviously kind of hard for me to say something if I'm not doing the right thing. So I said nothing. The helicopter landed, that exact helicopter in that exact spot. A group of 10 of us stepped to the side of the aircraft so they could take the machine gun off the back ramp and we could start unloading it. The rotors were turning, it was hot, we couldn't hear each other, but my platoon sergeant handed me a piece of paper. Had some serial numbers to some items that we were expecting. He's basically telling me, hey, it's your responsibility to make sure we get those specific items. So I grabbed that piece of paper from him and I turned my back to the group. I'm basically oriented just like this. And I'm backing my buddy Luke up in the Humvee. Just get him a little bit closer to the back of that helicopter. And the next thing I remember, it was just bam! Everything went dark. And I'm laying on the ground, disoriented. I can't hear anything. And my first thought is, one of the soldiers came up behind me and hit me on the back of the head, just guys horsing around. But then I looked up, and there were bodies and blood all over the ground. And the helicopter powered down, my hearing came back, and I heard that very distinct whistle of an incoming rocket. So I quickly got up, I dove underneath the Humvee for cover as rockets were impacting all around. And of course, as I was laying there all puckered up, hoping one didn't hit the Humvee, I realized it was a rocket that landed next to us. It had knocked me down. As that barrage finally ended, I crawled out from underneath the Humvee and I started making my way back to the soldiers that were still on the ground, really unsure of what I was going to find. And as I was doing that, a Marine yelled from behind me that I'd been hit. And up until that point, I hadn't felt any pain. But I turned my head and I looked at the back of my uniform and it was shredded. And blood was just starting to pour out. And it's at that moment that the pain just all of a sudden hit me. The other soldiers quickly triaged those of us that were hurt. They brought us to this small clinic on our base that was ran by an Afghan doctor who treated locals. Now, my wounds were very, very minor compared to everybody else. I was peppered in the back with some shrapnel, some small holes, nothing too serious. My buddy Luke bandaged me up. And as he was doing that, I saw Sergeant Michael Kelly, a supply sergeant who was recently attached to our unit from Scituate, Massachusetts. He's laying on this elevated stretcher off the ground. And the local Afghan doctor who worked in that clinic, a real short guy, he's standing on this red milk crate. And he's performing CPR on Michael. So I got up and I did a quick lap around the clinic so I could see who else was hurt. And I came across my platoon sergeant. The guy just gave me that piece of paper right before the explosion. He's laying on a stretcher on the ground on the outside of the clinic because the inside's already full of others who were hurt. The femoral artery in his leg was severed, along with other severe wounds. And by the time I came back around, it probably wasn't more than 30 or 45 seconds. But they had lowered Sergeant Michael Kelly to the ground and were zipping him up into a body bag. And I made my way into a small room in the back of the clinic where I found my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez. He's laying on the table. He's unconscious. His head is bandaged, but I could see his chest rise and fall. So I knew that he's breathing. And I grabbed his hand. I whispered everything was going to be okay. Medevac helicopters arrived, brought us to surgical teams that were spread throughout the country. I was on a helicopter ride with my platoon sergeant, who had by then lost consciousness due to the amount of blood that he lost. But thanks to the quick thinking of the soldiers on the ground that put a tourniquet on his leg and the medical staff that treated him, he survived and he kept his leg. In fact, he just took me out to lunch on Monday in Kerrville. Now, the surgical team removed several pieces of shrapnel from my back. They left a few souvenirs in there for me that were a little too deep to get out. And they stitched me up and they bandaged me up and they sent me back to the landing zone to get on another helicopter ride to go to Bagram Airfield to get some more advanced medical care. And as I was waiting there, my commander came up to me to see how I was doing. And I said, I'm going to be just fine. How's Emmanuel? And he looked at me and he said, he's going to be okay. And I just felt such relief, like just the weight of the world was lifted off of my shoulders. And he turned to walk away, and he got maybe 4 or 5 steps. And he turned back around. He had tears coming down his cheeks. And he said, I'm sorry that I lied. Hernandez didn't make it. My knees got weak as I hit the ground as my commander embraced me. Emmanuel died because shrapnel from the explosion hit him in the head. He died because I wasn't doing the right thing, because I didn't have the courage to speak up and to say something. And of course, there's been so many days since then where I thought how simple it would have been if I would have just said, guys, wait. Let's go get our helmets. Nothing would have been delayed. It would have taken a matter of moments. Just that morning at breakfast, Emmanuel was telling another soldier, I can't wait to get home and start having kids. And if only I would have said something. His wife, Jessica, would still have her husband. His mother, Ellie, would still have her son, and he'd still have his life ahead of him. But guess what? We've done it like that 100 times before, and nothing's ever happened. And I know it's such a cliche, it's that 1 in a million chance, but I'm living, breathing, walking proof that it absolutely can happen. Let me ask you all this. How many of you at one point in your life, now I know a lot of you aren't working in the most high-risk jobs these days, but at one point in your life, whether your personal life or professional life, have you ever taken a shortcut when it comes to something safety-wise? We've all done it, right? At least once. How many of you all in your life have ever bought a lottery ticket, like a Powerball ticket or Mega Millions? Raise your ticket. Raise your hand. Now, what are the chances of you winning the jackpot? Slim to none and slim left town, right? Astronomical. But we've got this tiny sliver of belief that maybe, just maybe, it might be you. If we have that attitude towards winning the lottery, we better have that attitude towards safety at work, because unfortunately, the chances of us getting hurt at work are a heck of a lot higher than us winning the lottery. We might have some lucky days, but we may not have a lucky career. And I beat myself up for a long time after that incident. I tried to drink my problems away. I tried to wash them away with pills. I was addicted to Vicodin and morphine for 5 years. It's a miracle I survived that. And those only served as challenges, or as accelerants for the challenges that I was already facing. But thankfully, I've learned that I can take that story, I can inspire others, and I can influence the future. I wasn't necessarily bred to be leading soldiers in combat. When I was born, my mother was single, 19, unemployed, living on government assistance. I grew up in rural Minnesota. Growing up, I saw drugs in the house. One day in the 6th grade, I'm coming out of school. My mother's getting arrested, put in the back of a police car, right in front of my entire school. My stepsister committed suicide in rehab. I ran away from home, took my mom to court because I didn't want to live there. It was a pretty tough childhood, but it could have been worse. Some of y'all can probably relate to some of those challenges. Now, I barely graduated high school, and I stumbled my way into a small community college in rural Minnesota. Obviously, I didn't have the type of family that's taken me on college visits or helped me fill out applications or financial aid forms. I had to do it all myself. So no real direction in life. I started skipping classes that first week. As far as college was concerned, I wasn't going anywhere. But all of our lives changed that Tuesday morning in September in 2001. How many of y'all remember where you were on 9/11? Raise your hand. Everybody that's old enough, right? You'd be surprised the groups I speak in front of. Sometimes we got some youngsters in there. I was in the 3rd week of my first semester, and as I watched on TV like everybody else, I felt the same feelings, helplessness and sorrow and anger. So 2 days after the attacks, I dropped out of college and I joined the Army. Now, the man in the picture there is the man my wife married, because that was about 40 pounds ago. I'm a little softer these days on the edges, but I went on to serve 6 years, 10 months, and 22 days as a paratrooper in the historic 173rd Airborne Brigade based out of Vicenza, Italy. Now, in order to become a paratrooper, you need to complete the Army's 3-week airborne school in Fort Benning, Georgia. After the first week, they separate the boys and girls from the men and the women. After the second week, they separate the men and the women from the fools. In the 3rd week, the fools jump out of the airplanes. Now, that very first week of airborne school is known as ground week. It's a lot of classroom type instruction. Now, I'll never forget one of those first classes I was in. The instructor's at the front of the room, and he's letting us know, when you exit out of a C-130 aircraft, go ahead and count to 4, and your main parachute should open. And if for some reason it doesn't, immediately activate your reserve parachute. Young soldier in the back of the room raises his hand. He says, "Sergeant, how long do I count for my reserve to open?" He said, "Son, you have the rest of your life to get that reserve parachute to open up." Now, I went to Iraq for 12 months during the initial invasion. I went to Afghanistan for 12 months. I loved it all so much, I went back to Afghanistan again for 15 months on my last tour. And it was at that point that the Army was trying to rotate soldiers off of frontline units. And so after 3 combat deployments, they put me on orders to go train new lieutenants in Oklahoma. Now, nothing against lieutenants or the great state of Oklahoma. I had zero desire to do that. I was ready for a new challenge. So December 2008, I get out of the Army. January 2009, I'm sitting in a college classroom with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids. Their biggest worry is, where's the party and who's going to buy my beer? Now, I'm 26 at the time, and I felt like the old man on campus, like the one everybody looks at, like, what is that old guy doing in this class? Obviously, in hindsight, 26 is still really young. Now, I was attending the university where at the time, the Minnesota Vikings held their annual training camp. I was majoring in sport management, and I was very fortunate to be named the first ever NFL Pat Tillman Military Scholar. Raise your hand if you remember who Pat Tillman was. Now, for those that do not, 9/11 happens. Myself, Patrick Nelson, drops out of community college in rural Minnesota. Pat Tillman gives up a multi-million-dollar contract in the National Football League and becomes an Army Ranger. And unfortunately, he was killed in Afghanistan in 2004 by friendly fire. Fast forward, his family and the NFL create this foundation, and I'm very honored to get that award. So those 3 things, the Tillman Award, majoring in sport management, and going to school where the Minnesota Vikings held their training camp, led to my very first job outside of the Army. I was hired as a marketing intern at the Vikings training camp. And I'll never forget the first day, because the person that was in charge of the interns was another intern. 21-year-old kid that's got a clipboard and a list of names, and he's going around telling everybody what they're going to be doing for the day, and gets me, he says, Patrick, I want you to go ahead and work over there at Station 17. And I turn around to where he's pointing. The bounce house? He said, yeah. I had a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, all that time leading soldiers in combat, and now I'm relegated to watching kids jump in a bouncy house. I can feel that physiological reaction my body's having, like I'm gonna punch this guy in the throat. How many of y'all have ever been in a similar situation where something just pushes your buttons and you have to do everything you can to fight it off? Raise your hand. Every hand should go up, right? How many of y'all have ever failed at fighting it off and you've done the, hopefully, metaphorical throat punch? Now, I had a vision of working in professional sports, and I knew if I would have let that reaction manifest into behavior, there was no way that was going to come true. There's a really good analogy that describes this, and it's from the book called The Happiness Hypothesis. It's called The Elephant and the Rider. So the elephant, that big, beautiful, majestic animal, represents your reaction, or the emotional part of your brain, or the throat punch, if you will. Now the rider, the little tiny person on top, represents your response, or the logical thinking part of your brain that knows better. If that little person on top has no idea what they're doing, which way is that elephant going to go? Wherever it wants to go, right? But just imagine if that little person on top, if they know what they're doing, if they have the skills, the training, the experience, they can keep that elephant on the exact same path. Go ahead, stand up for me, please, everybody. I'm going to give you all a test, which I'm sure you're just super pumped about, but don't worry, it's just one step closer to cake time. All you have to do is look at the screens, follow my directions. Everybody needs to say their answer out loud. So it's going to be mass chaos, everybody talking at the same time. Nod your head north and south if you're tracking. All right, outstanding. Here we go. State the color of the word.
Red, blue, yellow, white, green, orange.
All right, not too bad, but I see a little bit more enthusiasm. Let's earn that cake, okay? State the color of the word.
Red, blue, yellow, white,
Color of the word. Color of the word. What happened? This might be one of the most intelligent groups I've ever spoke to. What happened? Oh, it's the end of the day, right? Okay, we're coming up with excuses now. I like that. I was going too fast too, right? How many of y'all started reading the Word? All of you did. Why? That's what we're used to doing. You need to exercise cognitive discipline, your ability to inhibit that instinctual conditioned habitual reaction and let your brain trigger a more thought-out response instead. So I'll give you one more try. We only got to get 70% here to pass. And I'll even slow down for our Packers fans out there, Oscar. All right, here we go. I'm just kidding. I'm going to take that shot every chance I get. So state the color of the word.
White, red, orange, yellow, red.
We're coming off the rails. Blue, white. Okay, sit down. Whew. I don't know. I guess we'll give you all a pass. One of the best pieces of advice that I've ever received in my life came from a former colleague of mine, a guy who used to fly F-16s in the Air Force. One day he asked me, he said, "Hey, what do you think one of the first things they taught me in fighter pilot training is when an alarm goes off in the cockpit?" I said, "I have no idea. Push some buttons, mayday, eject. I have no idea." He said the very first thing that they taught him to do is to wind the clock. Because you cannot break anything by winding the clock. And it is making your brain take that brief pause when you're going Mach 3 at 28,000 feet and help you trigger more thought-out response instead. So just like we remember stop, drop, and roll, I remembered wind the clock. And it has worked wonders in my professional life and my personal life. If my wife and I are ever having a disagreement, I want to say something, but I know I'm only dumping more fuel on that fire. I literally do this. And she knows what I'm doing by now, but it's just my way of reminding myself, take a breath, take a step back, re-engage, wind the clock. Now, thankfully, that first day with the Minnesota Vikings at training camp as a marketing intern, I did not punch that young man in the throat. I was able to wind the clock. And I actually went on to work full-time for the Minnesota Vikings in football operations. My dream job with my hometown team. Anything the players and coaches needed off the field, I was their guy. I booked flights, hotels, catered meals, ticket requests, passed out fan mail, pay stubs, talk about a very humbling experience. I was their go-to guy. But it did not take me long, not as glamorous as what some people might think either. And it didn't take me long to realize that's not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So from there, I went to work for a small leadership development firm that literally took me all over the world. I got to do some really cool work in China, Africa, all over Europe, all over the States. Companies ranging in size from Fortune 500 organizations to small family-owned businesses. And on February 18th, 2020, while COVID was still in its infancy as far as what we knew at the time, I got let go from that job. And I cried. I was the sole income earner for our family. My wife stayed home with our 2 daughters. We were 12 months into the adoption process, and we had just experienced what's known as a failed match. December 2019, we were matched with a birth mother who was due in March of 2020. The beginning of February, I'm up in Anchorage, Alaska, pulling into the parking lot at Schlumberger to lead a leadership workshop. My wife calls me and said, hey, the adoption agency needs to speak with us. So we hop on the conference call, and we found out this birth mother was scamming us in the agency we're working through. So we lost out on $15,000, which it's a lot of money, especially when you end up becoming unemployed. So I'm down in my office crying. My wife is down there, not really sure what I'm going to do. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, so I wasn't going to throw a pity party for too long. So an hour later, wiped those tears away, went to the Secretary of State website, registered a new business, and I got my butt back to work. I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting a new business at the beginning of a worldwide pandemic. But at the same time, I'm not unique. I'm not special. It's not like, oh, poor me. I'm the only one being impacted. Every single one of us was impacted one way or the other. And I viewed it as an opportunity. You know, the government had all these great programs out there to help businesses, these forgivable loans, right? Well, you had to be incorporated by February 15th. I missed it by 3 days. Poor me, right? I was out there grinding. We had to go against all conventional wisdom that we knew, and we had to tap out our 401k to survive. And for those that might be wondering, after a lot of prayerful consideration, we did continue on the adoption journey. And in May of 2020, we brought home our beautiful daughter, Haven, just an amazing, bright spot in our lives during those really challenging times. And in March of last year, my wife gave birth to another beautiful daughter. So we have 4 girls, Hazel and Hattie, Haven, and Harper. We call them the 4-H Club. Now, we will eventually have a boy. If you have any tips or tricks, I'm willing to practice. But those beautiful girls are my why, and we've all heard the importance of having a why. But they're why I've worked so hard. They're why I work safe. And when it comes to safety, I'm not an OSHA-type safety person. I can't talk to people about, working at heights or confined space entry or, none of that stuff. I don't know it. But I look at it from a leadership standpoint. And I know that the research clearly shows the vast majority of safety incidents are completely preventable. Save that lone act of God that's out of our control. Yet incidents are still happening. Tell me some of the reasons why safety incidents happen. Shout them out. Complacency? Tired? Human what? Human choice. Head's not in the game. Distraction, fatigue, shortcuts, lack of training, lack of PP. We all know the reasons. Again, I would imagine at one point in our careers, we've all been guilty of one of those. I speak at many safety conferences where it's all safety professionals and every single hand goes up saying they've at least done it once. But again, we've been lucky. And those people who care about you, who expect you home at the end of the day, do not want you relying on luck as a strategy when it comes to safety. So what do you think it's going to take to really move the needle? Maybe a new piece of PPE to put people in, right? Maybe another OSHA regulation to follow? I think we have all of those, and we have them for very important reasons. But in my opinion and in my experiences, it's going to be getting people to take safety personally on a consistent basis. And I sort of stumbled into this world of safety in 2017. I was doing a lot of leadership development training with Marathon Oil. And in 2017, they had a pretty tough year safety-wise. People got hurt and people got killed. So January 2018, their CEO, Lee Tillman, gathers leaders from all over the field assets, brings them down to the corporate tower in Houston, and says, look, we got to put our heads together and figure this thing out because what we're doing right now isn't working. And I facilitated this seminar where this Fortune 500 oil and gas CEO gets up and the guy starts talking about safety. And this guy just didn't toe the company line and say what's expected, because it sounds good and he's the CEO. That guy got up there and he started crying. And he told a very personal story around safety. And I just watched how everybody responded to that. And it made me think of my last deployment to Afghanistan. So I was a squad leader. I was leading combat missions with my soldiers. And prior to every mission, I used to have to give a pre-mission briefing. Much like in the civilian world, we have our startup meetings, our tailgates, our toolbox, our JSAs, our tower talks, whatever we're calling them. And just like in the civilian world, I've faced similar challenges. My soldiers are more concerned with finding a pen to sign in than they were listening to what I had to say. Because they're hearing the same message every single day. And it is sucking them into complacency. So I knew I had to get creative and think outside the box a little bit. So one of the things that I did, and I know we got some people in the civilian world doing this, I'd start having one of my soldiers lead that briefing. I'd let them know the night before. I'd sit down and help them prepare because we want to set people up for success. And the next day, I'd stand right next to him and throw him a lifeline in case he needed help. And the other thing I did was I just started to tell some very short, personal stories around safety. Instead of just going through my checklist and being like, okay, you got your helmet on and your eye protection and your boots are tied, and I'd tell a very personal, short story around one of those topics that my soldiers could relate to. So out of that safety seminar at Marathon Oil, we created this 3-hour safety leadership workshop that was unlike anything they'd ever done previously. All the other safety training they've done is focused on the more technical aspects of safety. This workshop brought relevant discussions, practical tips, out of your seat exercises around 2 main pillars: service-based leadership and forward-looking accountability. And the cornerstone of this was something known as a safety stump speech, a brief yet powerful story on why safety matters to you. So we created this very easy 3-part template that allowed people to share a personal message briefly. The first part talks about what your view is on safety. It's usually 1 sentence. Then you share your personal story or message, and then you wrap up with usually another sentence or 2 on what your commitment is. Now, it never fails when I go into organizations and I have people that are like, oh, don't worry about me, Chief. I love telling my story. And they get up here and they're talking for 7 or 8 minutes, talking in circles, haven't even got to the point, and everybody is mentally checked out. There is value in being brief and to the point. That's why we created this template. Some of the most powerful stump speeches I heard were like 45 seconds to 1.5 minutes long. So we roll this workshop out to the entire field level organization at Marathon Oil, all field employees, all contractors, well over 1,000 people. You know these people, right? Roughnecks, male-dominated industry. They come into the safety training, they put their spit bottle on the table, they cross their arms, and they don't want to be there. It's not their first rodeo. And at the beginning, I get up and I do my little song and dance, and I say, hey, at the end, each and every one of you is going to get up here and share your story as well. And you can imagine how excited they are, right? Because who does not love being forced to get up and speak in front of others? Nobody. Unless you like the sound of your own voice like me, nobody wants to get up here. I kid you not, by the end, these guys were arguing with each other about who gets to go next. And I watched many, again, mainly men, who will tell you they're not the most approachable people in the world, get up here, shed tears, look their colleagues in the eye, and say, I care about you. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help move the needle on safety. And since 2017, Marathon has seen a great reduction and their total recordable incident rate. And we can argue metrics and safety till we're blue in the face, but the bottom line is they've had less incidents, less people have gotten hurt. And the safety stump speech, our workshop, has just been one small tool in that kit that they've used to build this proactive, mature safety culture with industry-leading metrics. Now, I mentioned one of the other pillars of this workshop was something known as service-based leadership, being able to meet the needs of others around us. And I had a really great example of what that actually looks like in action in my platoon leader on my first deployment to Afghanistan, a young lieutenant by the name of John Post. He's just a few years out of West Point. At that time, I'm 22. I'm a newly promoted sergeant. I got 12 months fighting in Iraq under my belt. But what this guy lacked in experience, he more than made up for in his leadership behaviors. This was the type of guy that could sit somebody down and tell you the 12 different ways you sucked at life. But you would leave that conversation with a smile on your face because you knew he cared about you. And he wanted to see you succeed, and he's going to be by you every single step of the way, giving you every single resource you need. And one of the ways he did that was he built authentic relationships with his soldiers because he understood the research, which clearly shows the more you know somebody, the more likely you are to watch out for them, to have their back, and to make sure that they are safe. There's value in taking time at work and investing in developing relationships. Now, I'm not saying we got to be best friends and have sleepovers on the weekends, right? But there's value in getting to know people. The other thing he did was he empowered every single one of the soldiers in our platoon to have a voice, to be able to speak up without any fear of repercussions. And it kind of made me think of this concept I've heard so much about in the civilian world called stop the job or stop work authority. See something, say something. How many of you, your organizations have something similar to this? Raise your hand. Pretty much everybody, right? Now, who can stop the job at your work, like out on a project? Anybody can? How do they know? You tell them? You might have a sticker on a hard hat, maybe a nice poster hanging up somewhere. Do you 100% believe every single person out there is going to stop the job if they don't know what they're doing or if they see, oh, we're already shaking our heads this way? No. Well, why not? We tell them every day. I found that there's a couple misconceptions out there when we hear those words, stop the job or stop work authority. The first one is it's a lot more of our short service employees. When they hear stop the job, they think you're pushing the big red button, you're shutting that entire site down. Now, that's probably very rarely the case. Stopping the job could be taking a step back, getting on the same page with your buddy, and getting back into the work. The other misconception is people think they're going to get in trouble for stopping the job. Now, I would hope that that is very rarely happening. I'm sure we have some Lone Rangers out there who do that. But as humans, we have this innate fear that if we do something wrong, or if we slow something down, we're going to get in trouble for it. If we have somebody out there stopping the job because they don't know what they're doing, and we got this supervisor, foreman, boss out there that yells at them, do we think they're going to stop the job next time? I bet they're a lot less likely. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have somebody stop the job 99 times because they don't know what they're doing out there in order to catch that one reason that's going to prevent somebody from getting hurt. Because those 99 other times are opportunities for us to teach, to be leaders, to be mentors. And if somebody doesn't know what they're doing out there, we want them to speak up and to say something. And I hope we're recognizing people when they do so. Maybe it's at the next day's tailgate. Hey, so-and-so stopped the job over here yesterday. Now, they didn't need to because of this, that, and the other thing, but that's exactly what I want you to do if you don't know what you're doing. So how can we actually get people to feel empowered to stop the job? Because we agreed that we're telling them and it's not 100% effective. What do you think we can do? Everybody go stand up for me. Let's just get the blood flowing quick. Here we go. It's a lot like church. Stand, sit, stand, sit. All right, here we go. All right, we're just going to get the blood flowing a little bit, conduct some real-time research with you. Just go ahead and do what I tell you to do. Put one finger in the air, and then do 2 and 3, and kind of twirl it around. There you go. Now go ahead and put it right there in your chin. Sit down. Some of y'all are still wondering, what? Chin, cheek, what? Now, that's not backed in a lot of academic research like a lot of these great research teams, but as humans, we have a tendency to mirror the behavior of others around us, for better or for worse. If I'm not wearing my helmet on that landing zone, how can I expect Emmanuel to do that? The good news is it does work for the good stuff as well. So maybe we need to get out there and we need to stop the job to show them it's not always hitting the big red button and that it is okay to take a step back. Every single organization I've ever worked with, they always say, if you need to slow down, slow down. If you need to stop the job, stop the job. So we're telling them, now we need to start showing them what that actually looks like. Now, the other pillar of this workshop was that concept known as forward-looking accountability. And traditional notions of accountability are sort of rear-view mirror focused. Like somebody does something wrong and we're going to point the finger at them and they're going to get in trouble. Forward-looking accountability is not about pointing the finger, it's about pointing the thumb. It's looking inside, it's reflecting. And it's taking the mindset of like an NTSB investigator. Maybe a plane crashes. When they go out there, their number one mission isn't to point the finger at somebody. It's to find out what happened, how can we immediately prevent it from happening again, and letting every single person know. Now, along the way through their investigation, they're going to find out if there needs to be some discipline and all that. But their number one mindset is how can we immediately prevent that from happening again. I learned a couple hard lessons on accountability during my time in the military. I was promoted to the rank of sergeant between my deployment to Iraq and my first one to Afghanistan. We were actually up in Germany training. We'd been there for about a month and a half. And so when we got back to Italy, my buddies and I wanted to go and celebrate my promotion. And we had a plan. We had a designated driver. And we went and tore that town up. Coming back that night / early morning, I'm a little inebriated in the front passenger seat. And I wake up to flashing lights. The Italian Carabinieri, the Italian police. But I'm not worried because we got our DD. Turns out our DD did not have an Italian license. So we get detained by the Italian Carabinieri, who call the military police, bring us back to base, wake up our commander and first sergeant in the middle of the night saying, you got some knuckleheads here. Those of you that have served in the military, what do you think I got? Anybody? Non-judicial punishment. I got an Article 15, and I got a field grade, the most severe level you can get. I was living in an apartment in the city of Vicenza, Italy. Now I had to move back into the Army barracks. I was restricted to base for 45 days. I had 45 days of extra duty, which meant I'm working 5 a.m. till midnight for 45 days straight. This is over Christmas and New Year's, 2004. They took a half month's pay away for 2 months. And what do they normally do? What else? Anybody? They take your rank away. But my commander actually went and fought for me to his commander for me to keep my rank, which is virtually unheard of. But I had a heck of a time understanding, why did I get punished so severe? I'm not driving the car. That's not leadership and that's not accountability. And that prepared me for a situation where the stakes were a little bit higher. Summer of 2007, I'm sitting up here, observation post Warhite, a small observation post in the mountains of northeast Afghanistan, the Nuristan province. Has anybody ever seen the movie The Outpost? Raise your hand. This is the observation post for the outpost for Cop Keating. We're supposed to do 2-week rotations up there. No running water, no hot chow, nobody up there to tell you you can't cut off your sleeves and take cool guy pictures. There were 14 soldiers up there. I'm the highest ranking. I'm in charge. But that doesn't make you a leader. That's just a position of authority. What makes you a leader is your behaviors and your actions. Now, our mission was twofold. We served overwatch over the valley below, and we had an antenna that allowed the 2 bases on each side of the mountain to still be able to communicate due to the geographical interference. And we had a small little 5K generator that had kept the batteries and the antenna powered up. So every once in a while, a Chinook helicopter would fly in with a big 500-gallon fuel blivet sling-loaded underneath, hanging from a rope. And you can see behind me in this picture there, we have a landing zone. It's flat, but it's not level. We're literally on a mountain. And that helicopter would come in, it would hover overhead, it would gently set that fuel blivet down. My guys would put like a rock in front of it so it didn't roll away. The helicopter would unhook the rope, fly away, and go back home. We've done it many times. We trained for it many times. This time is no different, except I'm on radio watch. Everybody took a turn monitoring the radios, having a shift, and it was my turn. So I'm basically standing where that picture is taken. Here's a little bit better view. Oh, sorry. There's a little bit better view. You can see the landing zone in the background there to the left, and it's canted. And so I watch as that helicopter comes in. It hovers overhead, and it gently sets that fuel blivet down. My guys chalk it off with the rock, and the helicopter unhooks the rope, flies away, and goes home. And just as my guys, they're getting ready to hook it up to that John Deere Gator vehicle right there, my soldier pulls out the rock from under it. And that fuel blivet rolls down that mountain, bursting open. And if that would have been early on in my military career, I would have hopped on that radio so fast and said, well, Jamie pulled out the rock from under it. It's his fault. Right? I mean, you can't put that one on me. But that's not leadership, and that's not accountability. Because the people that came before me, like Lieutenant John Post, I learned that it's not about pointing the finger. It's about pointing the thumb. I had to realize there were things that I could have done differently to prevent that from happening. I could have made somebody take my radio shift. I had the authority to do that, so I could have been down there supervising. And I didn't do it. I could have just had a little pre-job planning session with my soldiers, reminding everybody what the task was, what they had to do. And I didn't do that either. So I had to get on the radio. I had to let them know, I lost the fuel. It's my fault. Please send us more. Now they're going to come back through this dangerous valley where they shoot RPGs and machine guns at them every day, risking their lives because I messed up. I learned that the true test of a leader is not only being able to be accountable when things go right, but more importantly, can you be accountable when things go wrong? I want to share one last story with y'all before I go on the impact that we can have on people on a daily basis, regardless of our title or position. February 2019, my wife and I are coming home from church on a Sunday morning. We're making a right at a stoplight, and once you make that right-hand turn, it goes into 2 lanes. But something's happening up ahead, like it's taking longer than usual to even get to the turn. And as I get closer, I can see cars merging over to the left. And I make the turn, and I start to merge over, and I see there's a car in the right lane, just at a dead stop in the road. And I see about 5 or 6 employees from this instant oil change. It was right across the street. And they're pounding on the windows of this car. And I get a little bit closer, and I see there's an older gentleman that's slumped over in the driver's seat. And I'm from Minnesota, right? We're known as Minnesota Nice. We stop, we help people. What do? I drive right on by. But I didn't get very far because my wife turned to me and she said, hey, if that was you or my dad slumped over in that car, I want somebody like you to stop and help. She was right, like usual. Busted a U-turn, came back around. By then they had broken the back window. They gotten the guy out onto the road. One guy's giving chest compressions. What do you think the 5 other guys are doing? thumbs up there, you know what's, right? So I did what our training tells us to do. I went up to his head tilt, chin lift, started clearing the guy's airway. I can't even detect a pulse on this guy. With all the chest compressions, this gentleman's lunch is coming back up into his throat, blocking that airway. So I am knuckles deep, fish hooking some really disgusting stuff out. We're rolling him on his side. We're tag teaming CPR. Hadn't heard the ambulance at that point. So you start to wonder if anybody even called 911. But out of nowhere, a guy shows up with an AED. Not a volunteer firefighter, not an off-duty paramedic, a guy in a car. He runs it over. I'm sure a lot of you have been through the training. You know it's dummy-proof. It talks to you. It tells you what to do. We get it hooked up. It gives him a big old shock. Says continue CPR. Finally, the ambulance arrives. They take over, and I go home. And of course, all I'm thinking about is this guy. So later on that afternoon, I call the non-emergency number at the public safety office to ask, knowing that they probably can't tell me anything, but I have to ask. And they said, when we dropped him off at the hospital, it wasn't looking so good. He had gone 10 plus minutes without oxygen to his brain. Not looking so good for him. Later on that evening, Sunday evening, in the neighborhood Facebook page, people are talking about this incident. And somebody wrote in the comments and said, yeah, that was Carl from the Home Depot coming back from his daily lunch run at Sonic. So, of course, Monday morning rolls around, and I go into Home Depot, and I start explaining the situation, and I asked him, how's Carl? And they said, it's not looking so good. Tuesday comes around, and I'm back in Home Depot, and I'm asking around again, and not looking so good for Carl. Wednesday, they're sick of seeing me, but I'm not going to stop coming in until I know something. Not looking so good. Thursday, I get in there, and they said he's sitting up in his hospital bed telling dirty jokes. Widowmaker artery had a major clog. They put a couple stents in. He's going to be okay. Fast forward 4 months later, I'm in Home Depot for the 8th time that day. I'm sure some of you all can relate. Who do you think I run into? Carl. Carl's a very identifiable looking gentleman, and I go up and introduce myself. I said, Carl, the last time I saw you, I was fish hooking some disgusting stuff out of your throat. Now, I tell you all that story because I did not save Carl's life. I played a very, very, very minor role. A role that wouldn't have happened if my wife didn't have the courage to speak up and to say something. Carl was saved because of that man with the AED. That man could have been driving by, seeing the situation, being like, you know what, I bet the ambulance is right around the corner. That man had the courage to do something. He saved Carl's life. I got sucked into the diffusion of responsibility. The research clearly shows when we are in groups of people, we're less likely to point out a potential hazard or to help somebody. Why? You're smart people. Why? You think somebody else is going to do it. If you would have asked me before that situation if that would ever happen to me, Minnesota Nice Soldier Boy, no way. I help people. I got sucked right into it. We need to have the courage to be able to speak up and to say something. Now, I saw some of y'all taking pictures. If you want a copy of the safety stump speech template, go to that QR code right now. I'll also send you an article. All it asks for is your email address. I don't add you to any email list. You hear from me one time and that's it, because I don't like annoying emails either. But if you want a copy of the template, I'll send it to you. Please share it within your organization. I'm all open about everything, and I want to be able to make a difference. So share it with your safety people. Share it with anybody and everybody. Leave your email address. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Patrick Nelson, Loyalty Point Leadership. Shoot me an email. you want to talk some crap about the Vikings, Oscar, that's fine. We got football season coming up. I just want to close by saying thank you for the opportunity to join this amazing conference. I've been fortunate to sit and hear some of the awesome work that the research teams are doing, and it absolutely blew my mind. And so, Jamie, I want to thank you. I want to thank your great staff. I want to thank Daniel and Jenny and everybody that has worked so hard to put this together. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and safe travels home.